X を買ってみるのもいいですね。
We've had a,
問題なく
it seems we've had a thinning of the graves since I'm having a little problem. My problem is that last week I think I left my power here, and I didn't discover until this morning I don't have enough power to get through the class. So does anyone have a Mac Air? You have a Mac Air. Can I see if I can use the power?
Power?
Yeah.
充電器持ってないです。充電器が欲しいんだっけ。ノーチャージャー。
A no charger. Great. Well, is it charged?
Yes.
Okay.
50%とかなんだけど。
Do you have my the notes? Yeah.
はい、来ないで今日。
違う、なんかあれじゃない、チャージの上の表示が消えてさ、俺のチャージ何パーセント今分かんないんだよ。違う。
すごくない？それだったら。
さすがにそんなことはない。
待って、マックって何？どんな感じだろう。
一人くらいいそうだけどね、チャージャーは。
でもそのチャージャーでさ、俺充電できるのかな？
できないよ。
できないかな？
できないと思うよ。富士通でしょ、だって HP だもん。
変わんねえよ。同じ Windows。
Okay, class, we've got the solution. Let's see if that. Huh? Huh?
壊れた？
おう。
Huh? It's not the.
これヒュって持ってきたらできるやつだよね。
エアーってこと？
Let's see if.
マックバック、違うのかな？でもエアー。
こっちかな。
わかんない。
お前印刷してない。
わかると思う。
今日は印刷してない。
直しの。
ただ直し。わかるかも。
わかんないけど。
いや、わからない。
画面の大きさがあれなんじゃない？なんか左側になんかでもちょろちょろって書いてあるよでも。
違う、なんかあのさ、なんか
そういうことなんだと思う。
ね、そういうことだよね。
Oh, it's different. Oh,
出てきた。
なんか設定でなんかやると見えない。
なんか画面の大きさが大きすぎる。お、できた。できた。
なんか青いっすか？
あ、ごめん。なんかちょっと。
Okay, now what?
リーディング？
Do it.
それ。
早くね？もうすでに。
来週もやるじゃん。
どこへ？
来週出てる。来ないのかな。
ちょっとアップル強そうじゃない？
いや、岡田直何でもできるよ。パソコン大好きな。大好きじゃない。
It's there. It's there.
俺も大好きだよ。
これ。なお左側の画面にちょろちょろって書いてあるのは関係ない。
Okay. いや、どこ？Okay, it's not showing on the screen here, but it's showing up. Now what? Huh? Now what? Now what's wrong? No, there's something wrong. Okay, let me do. I've got this, and then I'll go back to this. I think. Let me see how many pages this one did. Oh no! Why did? I don't know what's wrong. Okay. What? Okay.
おお
Okay. But what? Oh.
それだけをこれで終わりそう
Where is it?
それはない。
No, I can't. It says here.
全然読めない。
じゃあ上に
見えない。
私が出陣しても意味なくない？ちなみに何もわかんない。
なんで来たんだろう。なんで来たんだろう。何ページ変えたいんじゃない？
上下にスライドすればいい。
上下にスライドすればいけんじゃない？
怖っ。
だって上にあるよ。だってその
上にあるよ。
読めないよここには。
え、そうなの？
うん。
Yeah.
先生怖い。
いや本当だ。
あ、わかった。
めっちゃスライドしててかカーソルねなんかねちょっと待って待って。
先生これ使わない方がいいかもしれない今日。だってわかんないもん。
だから先生のバッテリーが持つまで頑張るしかない。その間に授業を。
先生もこれ見ないと。
先生のバッテリーがないから。
Okay.
今日
Okay.
持ってくる。
本当だよ。
Yeah. This is okay.
なんでそんなことして
All right. This
な
is
ん
a
か
funny way to
ペ
do
ージが
it.
2個横に並んでるような設定になってるから私で持ってきてでカーソルもこっちで持ってきてこうやってやんなきゃいけないみたいな。
Yeah. This is okay. How should I? All right. It's okay. We'll try to do this. We'll try. Okay. I wanted to. All right. Now, and it's all on film. It's all being recorded. Yeah. Yeah. It's all being recorded. Okay. Is that on the? All right. Can't see it anyway. Now, this was the reason why I gave you this question. I'm looking forward to your answers, and I had some real interesting people ask me some interesting questions. What I'm trying to do here is get you to understand the power of network externalities, and this is an exercise in order to kind of get you to feel to understand how. So you have 36 million people in the 4 region area. 0.1% is 1 out of 1,000. So that's 36,000 people. So that was if, let's say you wrote an application and you got 36,000 people to download the application, and they were to be on some network, so they could communicate with each other in some way. And let's say, so the users would use the application to communicate with each other. Some could be buying, selling, whatever kind of communication. So you plan to generate revenue by selling advertising on the site's homepage. It could be that, or it could be some, maybe they'll be willing to pay for it. The point is that advertisers will pay 0.15 yen per year for each possible interaction. So you have to calculate the number of interactions, and it works out to a number. I think it's a billion yen. I think it's a billion interactions. It's basically 36,000 squared divided by 2. It's okay. It's going to be an exciting day. It's basically 36,000 squared divided by 2, and I think it's 10 billion, and so interactions. So the value would be about 100 million yen. Okay. Now you think that's actually only about 500 yen of the person. That's the thing. Is that if you could get an application that you only had 0.1% of the Tokyo region population, 36,000 people, and you could get and either advertisers valued the connections at each person basically worth 500 yen. That's 100 million yen. That's 100 million. You could get revenue of 100 million yen. The point is you can run. All you need to get a business like that is you need somebody probably to market and somebody to write the code. You know, maybe a couple. You could have a business with 2 or 3 people, and write code and try to make applications. All you need to do is get one that even like that, and you could easily generate, just for an example like that, 100 million yen of revenue. That's and nobody would feel like they're paying a lot of money. my point is that's the power that's the power of network externalities. And I think that that's what's going to happen. This is just to give you an example, a feel for the kind of numbers, the kind of value that that's being created with the internet, with mobile phones, with people being able to connect and communicate in a very broad way, and this kind of e-commerce type of interaction. It's very powerful, and I just want you to see that even something, even just a few, not that many people, and you're talking about some real money. So if you think about, well, what's the value of a Facebook with 2 billion people online, and they're all, and the number of people that are communicating, it's a massive amounts of these values. It gives you a beginning to get a feel for how massive the value of these are, and this is going to be a lot of fun. Oh yeah, okay. Okay. Oh, there we go. Let's see, and I'm looking forward to your answers on that. And also, I do want to say, ask as many questions as you want. As many questions as you need. If people asking questions and say, oh, they're getting embarrassed, that's fine. Just keep on asking questions. Never worry about that. So, anyway, I'm looking forward to that. I tried to make it very specific this year. So I'm looking forward to what people have to say, and the companies that you've dug up. And if each one of you gets a couple of companies, we're going to have a nice list of interesting companies that could be emerging companies in that market. So that's something that you can learn about. You can learn about network externalities, and also get a feel for some of the companies that you're out there, and maybe that you might be interested in working for. So we're going to talk now about marginal revenue product. Sorry, we got off to a late start. Marginal revenue product is it's the additional revenue earned by adding one additional unit of input in the production process. So if we add a unit, if we add an extra worker, how much more revenue, how much more money does the firm make if we had an additional worker? That's the marginal revenue product, is by adding one unit of input. Marginal revenue product labor is labor. Marginal revenue product of capital would be unit of capital. If I had a machine, what's the value of that? So I'm just repeating this. I just want to give you, that's a good sense, and basically the reality is that what you pay, what you can afford to pay people, what the wage that you can afford to pay people has to do with their marginal product, their marginal revenue product. That additional revenue that they earn when you hire them. That's what a firm can afford to pay, and that's the basis of wage. And I went over this last week. So let's see. Okay. And as you see, one of the things, one of the points I'm going to make here is the shift. We're showing the shift in the marginal revenue product of labor curve. This is one that happens when we put in an additional machine in our coffee example, and so it's increased the marginal productivity of labor. So that's shifted up and to the right, and in this case, since the wage is fixed because the firm's a price taker in the labor market. The firm is a price taker, so adding the machine means they can add an additional person at that wage. And so we are going to show exactly where wages come from. In here, so what we pointed out, the marginal cost curve is the output supply curve. So the cost shows the marginal cost is the marginal cost of increasing output, and that means we have to increase labor and capital. We have some increase in labor and capital, and so that has to do with the output supply. So the marginal cost curve has to do with the output supply, and that tells us what we're willing to supply to the market. So that's the marginal cost curve. The marginal revenue of labor curve, product of labor curve, is the firm's demand for that input. So the marginal revenue product of labor curve, which is, let me just go back, hopefully it works. Let's see, here it is. That's the marginal revenue product of labor curve. That is the firm's demand curve for labor. So it is strange. I can't look at this and see that. There we are. Okay. So the firm optimizes, maximizes its profits by setting its marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So remember that, marginal cost and marginal revenue. This is always the case. We're going to see this over and over and over again. Equals the price, because it's a price taker. That's its marginal revenue, is the price of the product. So it maximizes its profit from the perspective of its marginal revenue product of the labor curve by setting the marginal revenue product of labor to the price of labor, which is the wage. So now we're going to see this is one way the firm maximizes, optimizes its profits, and from the perspective of its labor input, this is from the output price. Here's the perspective of the labor price. So these really are the same thing. And that's what we're going to show. This is a duality that in both cases the firm is optimizing by selecting the size of its workforce. So the firm is optimizing in both cases, and what we're showing it's the same. They're making the same choice. So labor is added until the marginal revenue of adding the additional unit of labor is equal to the wage rate. And from the perspective of the marginal revenue product of labor, the firm adds workers until the marginal revenue product of the last worker equals the wage rate. So if they're optimizing, they're going to hire workers until that last worker earns exactly the amount of revenue. And that's the optimal amount. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at these two perspectives. And that's what's called the perspective, the viewpoint of the firm. Exogenous, that's from the outside. That's the marginal revenue of a unit of output. And the input side is the marginal cost of the unit of input. And then inside the firm, marginal cost of the unit of output, and the marginal revenue product on the input side, marginal revenue product of a unit of input. And then these are the optimizing choices. So what I'm showing is what I'm calling the duality between how the output and the input are two sides of the same thing. So if you, and one of the things that we're doing here is if you can only get information on the input, then you know something about the output. And if you know something about the output, you can get information about the input. So you don't have to know, if the firm is because the firm is optimized, you're making an assumption about optimal behavior. So this is, the one is the same as the other. And this is actually, there's a kind of tricks, you actually have that in mathematics and in physics, where you can have dualities and you can have mirrors. One is the mirror of the other. This is the kind of same thing in economics here. And so I'm just explaining what all this means. Exogenous is the firm has to take as a given. It's outside of the firm control. So that is the society's valuation of the firm's output and the input needed to produce the output. And then from the internal perspective, it's how the firm is put, the value it firm puts on the society's valuation. So the society says, okay, there's a price, a market price, and a market wage. So there's a price of the output and a price of the input. And those are taken as a given. And then the firm takes that and then makes decides how to optimize. So that to keep that in mind, that it's both sides, and they are the same thing. They come up with the same the same result. I also want to talk about, we've talked about things that can be both substitutes and complements. And I've talked a little bit about this, so I just want to point this out again because I think it's a very important point. And the interesting thing is that the perspective of the household, two goods can be either substitutes or complements, but they can't be both. But for the firm regarding inputs, inputs are both substitutes and complements. So just to keep that, I'm repeating this, but it's such an important concept. I want you to make sure that you understand that. And basically the way to think about it is that the increase, they're complements, and increase in the amount of QX, so the amount of the quantity increases the demand for both. So both increase. So they're both they're complements. And so you can just look at the equation and say, well, if QX goes up, well, both of these must go up. They have to both. They both. If it goes up, they increases the amount of each factor employed from this equation because of the alpha and the beta. But at the same time, a change in the price of either input causes a substitution either towards or away from a given factor. For example, if the price of labor goes up, then this, if you look at the equation, you can see that if the price of labor goes up, then you can use more capital and less labor to produce the same good, the same amount. So that makes it a substitute. So they're complements. They complement each other. The output goes up. And then the use of the two factors goes up. But you can also substitute. So they are both substitutes and complements. So that is a very important concept to remember about inputs in a production function. Let's see, do I need to? Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to illustrate the way this works. I'm going to give a series of examples so you can see what happens when you have something that's called. There's going to be two scenarios. We've got our Cobb-Douglas production function, which you've gotten used to, and where alpha is greater than 0, beta is greater than 0, alpha plus beta equals to 1, and that means constant returns to scale. You've learned about constant returns to scale. So we're going to continue two main scenarios, a labor-intensive scenario and a capital-intensive scenario. Here's labor-intensive. What do we put? We're going to put a value for alpha of 0.9. So remember, this is equal to 1, so that's 0.9, k beta is equal to 0.1. So that says that labor is very valuable to producing that. If we increase the amount of labor, if you look at this equation, just look at it, to say if I increase labor, I get a lot of increase. If I increase my labor 1 unit, I get more of an increase than I increase capital 1 unit. Because the capital is low. Capital here is not very productive. Since capital is not very productive, then it doesn't, this is labor intensive. There's a lot of, I use a lot of labor and a little bit of capital. Capital intensive, beta is 0.9. What that means is that when I increase my capital, I get a lot more. Capital is very productive. Labor is not so productive. So with this kind of, a firm that has this production function is going to tend to use a lot of capital and less labor. Of course, though, it always depends upon the price of the inputs. That also depends upon that. And so now we're going to think about how do we determine an optimal amount of each factor used in each scenario. And so the way we want to think about this is if you have these production functions, what are the choices in terms of the use of capital and labor? What are the choices that the firm is going to make? And so I'm making just some very simple examples so that now you may later in your studies you may start to learn about more more complicated optimization. Here I just want to give you some examples so that you can begin to feel it, begin to feel what's going on and get a feel and an understanding for what's going on. So let's assume that the price of labor is 1,000, the price of capital is 1,000. So the price of labor times labor plus the price of capital times capital is and let's say that's 100,000, and I'm using that, so the labor and capital. So now we want to find out. This is our budget. So we've got. This is how much we basically. This is our budget. What we can spend on labor and capital. So what we want to do is find out how much labor and how much capital are we going to use if we're optimizing under the labor-intensive and capital-intensive production functions. So here's the example, and also the reason why I made the choice of all these numbers. You'll start to make, so when you look at these tables, it starts making the values go directly into the table, and so you can see that the value, the amount of labor that you, the optimum amount of labor that you hire under that condition, it's the same. That you'll start to see the connection between this alpha and the amount of labor that you employ. The connection between the beta and the amount of capital that the firm employs. In both of these cases, the output is the same. The output is the same, labor intensive, capital intensive, and the average cost is the same. But in this case, the cost is the same, the output is the same, but it uses 90 units of labor and 10 units of capital. And in the capital intensive, it uses 90 units of capital and 10 units of labor. So that helps you to see that relationship. And as I said, I've chosen the numbers so you can directly see that. You get the same output, you get the same average cost. So we've set up everything the same now. Now we're going to do, and it's happened because we've chosen the same price for each factor. So, and also, I like to say you just keep it simple, look at this simple example, and you start feeling what goes on in a production function. So now we're going to take something a little bit more complicated. We're going to raise the price of labor. Let's say the price of labor goes up to 2,000. The price of capital stays the same. And we still have, this is our budget. In other words, let's say we have revenue of 100,000, say. Or we can only, our constraint, the most we can spend on labor and capital is 100,000. So that's our question. If we only have 100,000 to spend on labor and capital, and here's the price of labor is 2,000, the price of capital is 1,000, and depending upon whether we're labor intensive or capital intensive, what choice is the firm going to make? Well, that's an interesting outcome. You'll see, now that the capital is priced twice as high, the labor cost increases. So remember we used 90, we're going to use less. That makes sense. We're essentially substituting capital for labor because the price of labor has gone up. So we're using, the price of labor is doubled, we're using half as much labor. That's the connection. So there's a direct connection. Here we've used the price of labor doubles. In this example, we use half as much labor. So essentially, effectively, we're substituting capital for labor because the ratio has changed. So the labor intensive. So now in the capital intensive, again, we use half the labor. We use the same amount of capital, but again, we're effectively substituting capital for labor because we're using less labor. The price of labor has gone up. Okay, so that's how much we can spend. This is the optimum choices that we make. Now when we do that, if it's labor intensive, we have less output. Now remember it was 74, I think 74 point something. Well, that makes sense. Our price of labor goes up. We have to use less labor. We can't, for the same amount of money, 100,000, we can't hire as much labor. Our output goes down, and our average cost goes up. The same thing is true for capital intensive, but because labor is such a small part anyway, we only reduce our labor by 5 units. So our output doesn't drop very much, and our average cost goes up less. So you see, you just look at that carefully, you can see how we're changing the price. What we're doing is we're just running, it's like an experiment. We're running an experiment, the change of the price of one of the factors, labor. Price of labor rises, wages rise. How does that affect the firm's choice of labor? The optimal choice of labor, and how does it affect the average cost? And we can see that it's capital intensive or labor intensive that matters. And we see how that affects the output and the average cost. And then we're going to look at, now we're going to look at the other one. Well, now let's raise the price of capital. The machinery. There's a shortage of machineries. There's a shortage of, it costs more to make the machines. So that's that kind of assumption. And otherwise we keep everything else the same. Wages 1,000 back to 1,000. And we look at that result. And it's the same thing. You just see it's just reversed. The numbers are the same, they're reversed. The capital intensive, because now so the amount of capital, the price of capital goes up, that reduces by half. Again, the price doubles, we use half the capital. Our output is 38.72, average cost 25.82. Labor intensive, the price of capital goes up, we use less capital, but it's mostly labor anyway, lots of workers, few machines, so it has less of an impact. It has less of an impact on the output and less of an impact on the average cost. So that's the way to think. You have to think that when the price of some factor goes up, if the price of labor goes up, how does that affect firms? Well, this example shows that the price of labor goes up. Firms that are labor intensive, they're more effective. It's just a numerical example to help you to understand that it's more effective. If a McDonald's, for example, one of the things that's happening in the United States, there's wages, the minimum wage is being risen in a number of places. So let's say you're running a fast food restaurant or a restaurant, and one of the things that people are doing, in some cases what's happening, there's a substitution, the price of labor is rising, so there's a substitution, they're using effectively more capital, hiring less workers and using relatively more capital. And that's the kind of response. So these are responses you can see in the real world to these changes. So now I'm going to go back, and now we're going to, regarding the price of labor, now we're going to see the impact on, actually it's a decrease, where the decrease, it says increase, it should be decrease, I'll have to change it. It's the price of labor goes down to 500, and the price of capital is 1,000. So think of the original 1,000, now the price of labor has dropped to 500. There's more workers, lots and lots of immigration, lots of low-wage workers. That's the kind of story. Okay. So what happens? Well, labor gets cheaper. You're going to use more labor. For the same amount of money, you can buy more labor, which means you can increase the output. And when it's labor intensive, you can double, the price of labor is reduced by 50%, you can double the amount of labor that you use. you can double your labor. And here the output goes up to 134.8, average cost goes down to 742. It's almost half the original. It's almost half. So here's an example. That's what happens. The price of labor goes down. We use more labor. And if it's labor intensive, you use a lot more labor. If it's capital intensive, the price goes, the price of labor goes down, but it doesn't matter as much. You substitute labor for capital, but you can't substitute very much because labor is not very productive. The alpha is only 0.1. You can double it, but it only goes from 10 to 20. So you can see that reflects a reduction of 50% in the price of labor. And now we're going to change that assumption and see of a decrease in the price of capital. What happens if we decrease the price of capital? And what's interesting about this is a kind of more typical example. This is a more typical example of what happens in the real world. Price of capital more often goes down, such as computers, for example. The speed of computers, the ability of computers to compute, that's effective price decline. You can do the same services there's more services for the same amount of money, it's effective price decline. That's a decline in the price of capital. So here's the choice of labor and capital given the price and cost constraints. And here, the price of capital has dropped. For labor intensive, you can use more capital. It goes from 10 to 20. Remember, 90-10, now it's 90-20. Price of capital cut 50%. The use doubles. And this output and average cost, and for capital intensive, it doubles. Now we double again. Both cases it doubles, but because we're using a lot of capital to begin with, the price of capital drops. We use a lot more. We can use a lot more for the same output, and so that means we get more output for the same input of price, spending the same money. So our average cost goes down. These are examples of increasing returns to scale. So here's an example of increasing return. The firm is experiencing increasing returns to scale, and they're experiencing because the price of one of their inputs, and the price of an input declines. Now we're going to look at the effect of two factors. We're going to put the two factors together and on the profit maximizing decision of the firm. So what we want to do is we look, here's the labor, the choice of labor, the marginal product for one machine, and adding two machines so that we can see we go from one machine to two and labor from 0 to 6. So we're looking at those in that range, and we want to consider, we're looking at this is what happens. And we want to see where does the firm optimize, or how do we think about that? Well, firms applying input to the point where the cost of the input equals its marginal revenue product. The cost of the input equals its marginal revenue product. Then the profit maximizing conditions for the firm, that's the wage, the price of labor, equals the marginal revenue product of labor. Makes perfect sense. Price of capital equals the marginal revenue product of capital. So we apply capital to the price of capital, the marginal revenue product, that last unit of capital, the last unit of labor, we apply to the price of labor. So the thing that's important to remember, both of these conditions hold simultaneously. They occur at the same time. When the firm is they're choosing labor to maximize, and they're choosing capital to maximize. And we're going to show with this idea what happens, and we're going to show, let's take the marginal revenue product of labor equals to its price. And remember that price of the output. Okay, remember we're taking the price of that. So we can break price of labor equals the marginal revenue product of labor. That breaks down to the price of labor equals the marginal product of labor marginal product, what the extra output, the extra output from adding an additional worker times the price. That's the marginal revenue product. So it's the marginal product, the increase in output for one worker, times the price of the output. Is that clear? Okay, now look at that carefully, because now we can take 1 over px, put that to the other side, bring that over. Yeah, look at this. 1 over px equals the marginal product of labor over the price of labor, that ratio. Then we do the same thing, the price of capital is the marginal revenue product of capital. It's the price of capital, because that's our optimal. We choose capital until the price of capital is the marginal revenue product, that last unit of capital. So the price of capital, and we break this down into the marginal product of capital times the price of the output, because it's the price of the output. And now we got 1 over px equals the marginal product of capital divided the price of capital. 1 over px, 1 over px, it's the same thing. So that means we can make these equate. Marginal product of labor over the price of labor equals the marginal product of capital over the price of capital. Now, what's interesting about that is that should remind you, remember this, the marginal utility of x over the price of x, the marginal utility of y over the price of y. This is the price, this is the utility maximizing condition for the household. Any 2 units of output. Here we have the utility maximizing, the profit maximizing condition for the firm. It's the same form. It's exactly the same form. This is the price. It's the ratios of the marginal product of the marginal products over the price of the inputs. Here it's the marginal utilities over the price of the outputs. This is the price of the inputs, price of the outputs. But it's the same form. It's the same idea. That's the way you think of that, look at that, and you realize that you're talking about, it's the same, a similar kind of approach that's being taken. So what we want to do is think about, we want to think about the big economy and think about how, what is it that, we're going to talk about elasticities, elasticity of demand for output. So now the demand for inputs, that's capital labor, are a function of the production function and the price of the output. So that's what we've been doing. We've been showing that the demand for inputs, so you have a production function, labor, capital, labor, some intensity of labor and capital, and that's affected by the, so it's affected by the production function, whether it's labor intensive, capital intensive, or in between, and the price of the outputs, the price of the input, the price of labor and the price of capital. So that's the demand for the inputs. The input factor demand curves are derived from the production function and the output prices. Okay, so we think about how the supply curve is upward sloping. That is, the industry is willing to supply more output to the market if the price of the good rises. And that's ceteris paribus. What that means is, it's a Latin term, you see it a lot. It means holding everything equal. Holding everything else equal. So nothing else changes. If nothing else changes, if the price of the good rises, then the industry is willing to supply more output to the market. But if we remember, well, what happens? We go back. Let's go back to that. Anyway, think about it, Cobb-Douglas. Think about it. If QX goes up, we demand both inputs. What happens is if QX goes up, we demand both inputs. So that's the effect of a shift I was hoping to show that, and it turned out it was too many pages to clear. So then if the price of the good rises, the marginal revenue product of the input also rises. Marginal revenue product of the input rises. The marginal revenue product rises and shifts out, then the demand for the input increases. And that's true for all factors. So that's the effect of the demand shift for output. If demand increases, something changes in the outside world that causes demand to increase, then there's an increase in the use of the factors. What are the kind of forces that do that in the big economy? One of the things is that let's think about the effect of capital on the demand for labor. Now remember, they're complements. Capital and labor are complements. So if the demand for capital increases, if it shifts outward, then the demand for labor shifts outward. The demand for both increase. So, for example, here we added a second coffee machine. The productivity of the coffee shop's labor increased, and the demand for labor shifted outwards. So that's the effect of an increase in demand for capital. So one of the things that we want to think about is the technological change, because technological change is probably the thing that has the biggest impact on the shift in the demand for output. So we're going to be looking into that and what those effects are. And they are these economic forces. One is the substitution effect. So let's say what happens. Let's say if the productivity of capital increases. In other words, the effective price of capital. It's the same as if the price of capital is decreasing. Say, for example, a computer. If the computer, for the same, let's say the computer you buy this year has more capability than the computer you bought 2 years ago, and it's probably about the same price. So if that's the case, it's actually increasing productivity. It's effectively a price reduction. So that's an increase in the productivity of capital. Then by the substitution effect, the demand for labor, by substitution, it falls relative to capital. Then the demand for labor for any given output of the good X shifts to the left. So the demand for labor, holding the output constant, shifts to the left. But if the productivity of capital increases, then by the complementary effect, the demand for labor shifts to the right. The demand for labor shifts to the right because if the productivity of capital increases, then we produce more goods for lower price. If we produce more goods for lower price, then the quantity the quantity output increases. If the quantity output increases, the demand for labor could shift to the right. Shifts to the right. So you have both forces. You can see what happens is that if the effect of an increase in the productivity of capital can cause this, from the substitution effect, demand for labor to fall, from the complementary effect, demand for labor to increase. So what we want to think about is, well, you can see that that's going to impact whether the demand. We can think about how that affects how those factors, the increase in productive capital, affects the demand for labor. And here's the interesting thing: that if you think about it, before the Industrial Revolution, and think about the agricultural sector. The one thing is, before the Industrial Revolution, the productivity levels were quite low. You know, you could get energy. You know, you use water to some degree, but productivity wasn't very high in general. Even if you could build machines compared to when you had the machinery that was developed in the Industrial Revolution, productivity was very low. Now, and in the agricultural sector, before the Industrial Revolution, productivity was very low. There was very little capital. You used very little capital. You might have had, the only capital you would use, well, you had horse, you had, say, cattle, and a plow. Maybe you had an irrigation system. That was capital. That's infrastructure. But some simple machines. People cut with hand. Maybe you have a machine that could cut a little bit faster. Not much. There was very little capital that was employed. So what happens? And that was pretty much everywhere in the world. And so it was, the agricultural output was a function largely of the natural condition of the soil and the availability of water at a given location. And so agriculture remained, even in the early industrial era, it remained quite labor intensive. But the thing, the introduction of capital into agriculture dramatically increased the productivity of agricultural labor. And this is something, and remember when I showed you the examples, I had a picture with these people in the field. It was a US field, it was the early 20th century. Lots of people and needed a lot of people to work in the field. And where today, in a large-scale farm in countries like the United States, there's lots of machinery and very, very few people that work. So in that case, the increase in productivity in the agricultural sector caused a shift. It actually was a shift in the production function. Capital became, the beta became larger, alpha became smaller. The demand through technological change, the demand for labor, even though the demand for output increased significantly because the cost of production went down because of the efficiency of capital, but the demand for labor in agriculture collapsed. And in fact, we're still seeing this effect now. We've seen it in China in the last 30 years. We're about ready to see it in India. I think we're going to see in the next 30 or 40 years in India something maybe not as dramatic, but nonetheless a gigantic, rapid change in the societies as a result of that, and the substitution of labor for capital that's going to take place as agriculture becomes more mechanized. Now, obviously, one of the problems is that there's a lot of social disruption. There's a lot of social disruption, a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity. The society can grow wealthy. It can overall grow wealthy, but in the short run, for a lot of people, there's a lot of social disruption. So, and where did that go? The interesting thing is that at the same time that capital went into agriculture, capital went into manufacturing. And what was very interesting was about, for manufacturing, because the demand, before the Industrial Revolution, everyone pretty much focused on the most common commodity was food. Food and clothing. Other than that, there wasn't much you could buy. You spent your money on buying food and clothing, and everything else was for most people was a luxury. But when the Industrial Revolution came and machinery made the production cost drop a lot, then suddenly the demand for all kinds of goods increased, which created tremendous opportunities for labor. So that even though you had capital-intensive industries, you might have had capital-intensive industries, but the labor, the demand was growing so much because the cost of production dropped so much that the demand for labor exploded. And that's the kind of thing, the process that we've seen. We've seen in the throughout the industrial world in most countries over the past over the past 200 years. Now, why do I mention this? Think back to the examples I talked about earlier in this lecture, and the effect of the change of the price of labor and capital. And now, this is why we bring that topic up. We bring it, and I hope the page comes up. Come on. Now what happened? Oh. 31%. You're getting low too. You're magic here. Let's see if you got some. You're the only one that can get this to work. You come? All right, yay! Thank you. You know, it's that inspiration that I need. So let's see. And I don't know why it went away. Anyway, this is down to 31%. So if this runs out of power, then I'll shut back to the other computer and finish the lecture. Great, I'm going to get through. One of the interesting things that happened, that eventually, 200 years ago, in the entire world, most people worked in agriculture. 40 years ago in China, most people worked in agriculture. Today, most people work in agriculture in countries like India or Africa. When the Industrial Revolution comes in and capital-intensive efficiencies come from the introduction of capital, the demand for labor in agriculture plummets. The agricultural sector, for example, in the labor force in the U.S. is less than 3%. I think it's about 2% now. It's higher in Japan, but that's only because there are lots of people who produce very little rice, but get paid in order to do it. They also work other jobs, many of those people. But that percentage is also dropping. That looks like the most advanced countries, the agriculture sector is about 2 to 3% of the labor force. Then the manufacturing sector increased, but the manufacturing sector in the industrial world has been decreasing because eventually the increase in the demand for goods, probably think about your apartment or home where you live, it's probably full of stuff. And there's probably not much room, you know, most people, most people's houses that I know, most people's houses are full of stuff. Our apartment is just full of stuff. Come on. Okay. We will. All right. Yeah, we'll be able to have this problem fixed next week. Let's see. Is it the right page? Oh no, we're on the next page. Now let's see. So basically now it's what's called the service sector, the tertiary sector is most of the jobs are going to. But now we're going to see some of the tertiary sector, the service, what we call the service sector, the third sector, agriculture, manufacturing, services. Now you have a lot of the services are being automated. Automation is coming, machines, capital is being substituted for labor in more and more sectors. You go to a store, go to a grocery store, and you can go to you can check yourself out. You don't have to have somebody check you. There's lots of stores now that have that. So that's capital is being substituted for labor there. So now you're beginning to have the same problem. And in fact, in much of the industrial world, one of the problems that are having is that people who used to work in manufacturing or lower level service sector work, the jobs are disappearing, and that's causing a lot of social problems. So I want to just talk briefly about technological change. There's two things. As I mentioned earlier, one way to describe technological change is if beta increases. So if technological change often happens because beta increases, alpha falls, so that the mix of the production becomes more capital intensive. And another one is you can add a linear multiplier term to present technological change. This is another way. This number can grow. The beta can grow, but another way is that this TK can go up. So that's just another way mathematically to show changes that are due to technological change. So now what I'm going to talk about is elasticity. Elasticity of demand for inputs. And in going over this section, I looked at it. This may be a little bit, a lot of material here. So I urge you to go over this section carefully and maybe go over once or twice more, and perhaps look at the video and see this. So I've said that I want to look at the effective elasticity of demand on input demand curves. So the elasticity of demand on input demand curves. And there's two primary effects of the elasticity of demand. And that's with the change of the price of the good on the impact on input demand curves. And one is the size of the factor substitution effect, and the other is the size of the output effect. So then that's to the degree that they're substitutes and complements. That's what we're talking about. Here's the one. How much can you substitute one factor for another, and how much and what is the complementarity? How do they complement each other? If the demand for output is relatively elastic with respect to the price of the output, so if the output changes a lot, price is small, the output changes a lot, that's a relatively flat demand curve, okay? Then the ability to substitute factors increases, because there's just a lot of change. A small price produces a big change in output. So it's very sensitive. It's very sensitive to the amount of output. This is very sensitive too. Yeah. Well, it's been an adventure. Yeah, as I say, it's been an adventure today. Technology is a wonderful thing, and sometimes it's not quite as wonderful. Okay, now, where are you? I can't find them. There it is. And that's interesting. Okay, so what I'm saying is that if the demand curve is relatively elastic, small change in the price causes a big change in output demand, then that increases the elasticity of demand for inputs. I'm sorry, increases the demand for inputs changes more. How do we do that? It seems to be. Right. Okay. Let's see. Now I'm saying here is this: the ability to substitute inputs is limited by the level of technology available, and you could not substitute capital for labor very much until the Industrial Revolution. So keep that in mind. That limitation is the level of technology as well. Now let's look at the effect of elasticity of demand on input factor curves. Okay, so it's two things. One, the relative factor intensity of the input, labor intensive, capital intensive. We've looked at that today, and the elasticity of demand in the output market. Relative factor intensity, the more intensive use of the factor, the more pronounced is the output effect. Now think about, like with alpha equals 0.9, then an increase in the demand for the output is going to have a far greater impact on the demand for labor. We've already seen that in the example earlier. Now let's look at output market demand elasticity. Let me hurry up before it gets going up. I guess that's it. The more elastic the output demand with respect to its the price, the more pronounced is the output effect for all inputs. That's the effect on output market demand elasticity. So if it's more a small change in the price of the output causes a big change in quantity, which then goes to both factors. I think we'll have some exercises so that you can understand. There's a lot of words, there's a lot of concept. So to help, we'll have some exercises so that you can understand that. It's a lot of material. As I'm going over today, I'm thinking this is, I think for you, in order to make sure that you clearly understand it, we'll have some exercises so you can see and make sense out of a lot of words that might not make a lot of sense for some people. Now we're going to shift. We're going to shift into discussing capital markets. Now we're going to talk about capital markets. And we have about half an hour. Let me see how much we are down to, what percentage here. I think we're okay. If we run out of power on this computer, I'll shift to the other computer. So it'll work. We're going to get through. We're going to talk about capital markets now. Capital markets are capital. When we talk about capital, we're talking about the financial. Now it's a shift to talking about financial markets. We talk about, it's the firms, the households, and households capital in the form of savings, providing capital, supplying capital and input markets to firms who demand labor, capital, and land, and the use of capital in order to supply goods and services in output markets. So that's what we're going to do. Capital markets, and this is kind of another part of the class that I enjoy teaching, having done a fair bit of work in the financial sector, at least one sector, the real estate market, which is a sector of the financial market. This is an area that I find very interesting. So we're going to give some definitions. The first one is capital. Are those goods produced by the economic system used to produce other goods in the future? And that's used by the system that used to produce other goods. And tangible capital, tangible, right? It's physical capital. That's things you can touch. This is tangible. You can use that to produce. That's tangible capital. This is tangible. We're using this to produce the output, which in this case is this lecture today. So it's the material goods used in the production of future goods. And those include non-residential structures, factories, office buildings, power plants, warehouses, malls, durable equipment, machines, transport equipment, rails, residential structures, houses, residential buildings, inventories of inputs and outputs that have not yet been sold. That's tangible capital. Intangible is something called goodwill. That's a public perception of the firm. That's also important. It's brand name, brand image. Those are all things that they're real in that they affect how people look at a company. If you're looking at the airbag company, not Tanaka, Takata. Yeah, Takata. Yeah, they're really in big trouble, and so is this. This is in big trouble too. They obviously a company like that's lost all of its goodwill. When a company is going through that, they've lost all of their goodwill. I mean, it's because of the problems that they're having. Now no one trusts the product. Basically, it's one of the reasons why the value of the company is now very low. Then we have social capital, social infrastructure such as roads, bridges, rail networks, water sewage systems, telecommunications. Most, if not all, social capital is produced by the government. Not necessarily. This private sector produces telecommunications, but a lot of social capital, roads, for example, tend to be produced by the government. Investment is the creation of new capital measured over a period of time. So investment is measured as a flow. So it's a flow of new capital that enhances the stock of existing capital. So you have stock, capital stock. And capital stock means this term here means the amount of capital, the amount of roads, the amount of machines. This is what we mean by capital stock. We're not talking about corporate stock. We're talking here about the stock of things that are used to make things. So investment flows into the capital stock, and it adds the capital stock. And then we have depreciation. Depreciation is an outflow. Inflow and an outflow. Investment to increase the capital stock. Depreciation. What's depreciation? It's the decline in the value, economic value of capital over time. It's, in this case, a negative flow of capital. For example, the computer, the computer is reduced in value over time because the software gets more complicated, the computer doesn't have enough computing power, newer computers have more power, they can do more things, so it becomes less valuable. I still like it, but it's becoming less valuable. And that's called depreciation. It becomes something that becomes less worth. So that goes down. Roads deteriorate, computers get old, cars get old, vehicles get old. That's depreciation. So you have to have a certain amount of investment to your capital stock just to keep it from declining. So there always has to be some investment because just physically capital decline, the value of capital declines over time. Financial capital markets, now we're talking about the financial market, the set of institutions that channel household savings into capital investment projects for firms. And I've got the schematic of what that is. The capital market exists as an intermediary between the household and firms. Households supply savings to capital markets, who lend and supply capital to firms. Firms borrow and demand capital from the capital markets. Firms invest in investments that increase the amount of capital stock in order to get a return on an investment. So incentives to invest. People invest their money. What's happening when people invest? You have to save. Investment comes from savings. You have to have savings. And that means people have to give up consumption now to increase consumption in the future. So they're giving up consumption now because of the expectation of increased consumption in the future. That's investment. They're investing in that. And the incentives it could be above normal rates of return, presence of scale economies, replacement of depreciated capital, changes in technology that create above normal rates of returns, or presence of scale economies, and then changes in firm output. That could also be as a result of changes in technology. You have to have an ability to forecast. If you're going to do make financial investments, investments mean you have to plan for the future. You have to plan for the future. So if you plan for the future, you have to make some forecast about what the cost of the project, how much it may cost to borrow, and to compare the opportunity costs of what are the benefits, the cost and benefits of various investments. And so we'll see what that means is that there is some time value of money. Time value of money. And now we're going to come up with, hopefully, there it is. We're going to come up with, this is, let's see. Here's a schematic that talks about the demand for investment and savings and borrowing. I'm just going to skip through. Please look at this page. But basically there's a supply and demand of investment capital that depends upon the higher the interest rate, the more people are willing to, more present consumption that households are willing to give up for future consumption. And the same thing as the demand for capital increases. Now we're going to talk, this is one of my favorite parts of the whole course, because now I get to talk both about some of my own work and about an equation that these are the kinds of things that have real value. There's a real value in this. And we can value the future relative to the present through a mathematical formula called present discount value or present value. And this is, present discount value is the amount of money that needs to be put aside today, which at a given interest rate, R, some interest rate, would reach a target value VT at some future time T. And you can express that. What we're doing is we're saying, what's the value, some future value sometime T, is the amount that we put aside at the present, multiplied times the interest rate, raised to the power of the time. So it's the power of time, and that's where you get compound interest, and that's the power of compound interest. And we can rewrite this formula, and it gives us the present discount value. A, 0, that means that at time 0, that's the present, the value of the present equals the future value divided by 1 plus the interest rate divided by the time. That is a very, very, very powerful equation. It's a powerful equation, and it's one that personally I use to make, I make quite a lot of money from using this equation. Being able to know this equation and understand its use and apply it created personally tremendous business opportunities for me. And this came early in the last decade. This is a building that's located, this is DHL. This was their first, or a building that they built in the Shinkiba area of Koto, that was built for them in the Shinkiba area. And this was built by a foreign company named Prologis that came into the market. And they acquired the land, and they started building the building for DHL. They made a deal, and so then they were getting ready to sell it. They wanted to sell it in the market, and so they came to me. I was working in the real estate business industry at the time, and I, as among other things, doing research. And they said, well, we want to value this property. We want to know what the value of the property is. Well, I didn't know anything about valuing real estate. I worked in real estate, but I'd never done any valuation of properties. So I thought, well, they said, well, we'll pay you a little bit of money, figure it out. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know how to value property, but they showed me there's a lease, and they have cash flow, and it's going to last a certain length of time. And I said, oh, well, I'm an economist, so I know I use this. I use this. And so I made to me it was a simple model, cash flow model, of the future values of the cash flows over the lifetime of the project. Got a present value added all the values up and came up with a value, and I showed them how I did it. And I didn't think, they said they sent it to me, and I sent it to them, and they just, this is a little bit funny, but they came back to me and they said, you're the best person in the market. You're the best person you're the best valuer in the market. And I said, what? What do you mean I'm the best value? I don't even know how to value property. Well, you're the best. You're the best guy in Tokyo. They said, you can do this better than anybody else. So that's how I got a tremendous opportunity. And I ended up working with, I'll show you and what I did eventually for this property. And that's where this map comes from. The property is located right there. This is Shinkiba. Here's Tokyo Station right there. It's only about 5 kilometers from the city center. And I looked at it, and I was able to come up with an approach to value the property. And it was at a time when no one in the market in this country understood how to do this. So believe it or not, 15, 16 years ago, people didn't understand how to do this. What you're going to learn in this class is what people didn't understand. Almost nobody understood how to do this just 15, 16 years ago. And so I figured this out for this building, and I ended up working with these people for about 9 years, almost 10 years, valued hundreds of billions of yen worth of property, helped them build up a business of the portfolio value of more than 500 billion yen. And eventually they went public on the Singapore exchange, a multiple billion-dollar IPO. But this, and really radically transformed the logistics market in this country. So this is the kind, and my point is, well, this is the kind of thing, I just used something, it was far from the most complicated thing. And it's something that you can learn in this class. And you can learn this in this class to be able to use this concept that I use basically to help a company and help a company build up a real estate empire of hundreds of billions of billions of yen. But so this is real stuff. This is real stuff here. These are our real skills. The most important thing of that equation is the value R. R is the interest rate. What that is the value of time, of money over time. And in fact, what I had to do, one of the things that I did well was figure out how to properly value that, so that the markets and the lenders could look at what my valuations say. Okay, he's got the right. We think he's doing this right, and we're going to lend 20 billion yen for this building. So that's the kind of decision that I had to come up with. Was how do you calculate the proper interest rate? But at any rate, to understand what that is, well, first off, I want you to show what kind of possible values are there for R. The first thing is that we've got 5 minutes, is to show that it cannot be negative. That is, the future cannot be more valuable pretty much than the present. Does anyone have 1,000 yen they can just show me? And you just pull 1,000 yen out of your pocket. Now let's say you wanted it and you were going to invest that with me. And I said, okay, I'll give an example of negative interest rate. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to hold this, and you're going to give this up. And, I don't know, maybe 3 years from now, I'll give you back this. How would you feel about that? That's a negative interest rate, right? And actually, we have had negative interest rates, and you're right. But I don't think you would be very excited. I think you'd rather go out and spend the 1,000 yen now, rather than 3 years from now just get this. But that's an example of a negative interest rate. And really, well, we've had some crazy examples recently, but they're not really normal. That's some abnormal, and I think at some point we may talk about that in this class. But normally, you being a normal person won't give me 1,000 yen so I can give you back less in return. You'll want me to give you back more, and so that's a positive interest rate. And now, in terms of the present value, let's just look and see what happens. Let's say if we have, just to understand how this works, to give a simple example, let's say we have 100,000 yen. Let's say a future value of 100,000 yen, and let's say 1 year in the future, t equals 1, so that's 1 year in the future. Future value of 100,000 yen. Let's say the present value of that 100,000 yen a year in the future. Well, it depends upon the interest rate. As the interest rate R increases, the present discount value, if it's 0, if the interest rate's 0, then it's the same. 1%, what, 1% less, 99,010. 2.5, 95,238. Go to 20, 83,333. The value goes down. The present value of something declines as the interest rate increases. That says that the future, the future is more valuable. I don't know about the future of this computer, but we made it through. Kind of. I spoke too soon, and we are down. Well, we were down. We have 3 minutes to go, and okay, there we go. Now, so let's look and just see, because we have target values, and you can see the effect of different interest rates. This is an important table here because I want you to look at this and just see how the effect of different interest rates over time. In other words, what this means is, if our target is 100,000 yen, and 5 years and the interest rate is 1%, we have to put aside 95,147 yen now to get 100,000 5 years in the future. That's what that means. 95,147 now at a 1% interest rate to get 100,000 yen in the future. Or 95,147 yen now is worth 100,000 5 years in the future. That's what a 1% interest rate means. 3% interest rate, 100,000 yen 5 years in the future is presently worth 86,261. It's a lot less. 5 years in the future. Let's go to 5%. 78,353. That also means we have to put aside 78,353 yen now at an interest rate of 5%, so that 5 years in the future we have 100,000 yen. That's what that means. 10%. And look how it keeps on going down, down. Now it's only 62,000 yen. 62,092 yen that we have to put aside now to get 100,000 yen 5 years in the future. But this also means that if the interest rate is 10%, that the value of 100,000 yen 5 years in the future is only 62,092. So that's the time value of money. That's very, very important. To understand what that is, how it works, is a very, very important. I might be at the end. I think I'm at the end. We got through, and we're ready for closing time. So we got through. Thank you very much, and thank you for letting me use the computer, and hoping to have that technical problem solved next week. Now, I've asked for the permission of 3 of the students in the class on their answers for the 7th question, and I want to share those. I thank you. They've given me permission to do that. I'm going to put that in so you can't tell who they are, but I want so you can look at their answers and learn from that. I think it will be very valuable for students to see that and how the kind of thinking. And that's also, you can see, this is some very clear thinking that people are doing in the class. So I'm going to have that. I'll get back you. I'm going to work on getting also. I haven't got your the previous exercises. Let me get those. I think it's week 7. Anyway, I'm going to get that. I'll get that to you first, and get those question 7 from the midterm, so that you can compare those answers. And I think you'll have a lot to learn. I think the students, everyone in the class will be able to learn from each other on that. And so thank you, and we will see you next week. And thank you for allowing me to use the computer. Thank you.
あれだよ、なんか朝のさ8時からディズニー行きたいとかって